Okay, so in this video, we're going to look at the principles of exchange and transport for AS biology. In terms of transport and exchange in living organisms, we're talking about transport, I suppose, within organisms. So how it gets around, let's say, the body or the plant of a particular organism, and also the exchange in terms of how things move in and also out of organisms. Okay, so the first bit of this, they talk about the link between surface area and the volume ratio. So here you can see if we take an organism which is 1 centimeter cubed, so 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter, it would have a surface area of 6 centimeters squared. So you've got 1 by 1 is 1 centimeter squared, you've got 6 sides. So therefore a surface area of 6 centimeters cubed, whereas its volume is 1 by 1 by 1, which equals 1 centimeter cubed. So that would give it a surface area to volume ratio of 6 to 1, or a surface area to volume ratio of 6. Okay, whereas if something is, let's say, 4 centimeters cubed by 4 centimeters by 4 centimeters by 4 centimeters, you would have a surface area of 4 by 4, which is 16 times 6 is 96. And then, so the surface area would be 96. Its volume would be 4 by 4 by 4, which is 64, which would give it surface area to volume ratio of 1.5 to 1, okay, or 3 to 2. So it gives it a surface area to volume ratio of about 1.5. Okay, so you can see as organisms get larger, as you can see going from left to right here, this would be 8 by 8 by 8. So a much larger organism than something that's 1 by 1 by 1. Its surface area to volume ratio decreases. Okay, and as we talked about with how things pass across membranes, etc., surface area plays a part. So the larger the surface area, the easier it is for diffusion to occur. So a surface area to volume ratio which is large, up here, a very small organism like this, it's easy for things to diffuse in and out of. Okay, whereas a much larger organism, like this 8 by 8 by 8, much smaller surface area to volume ratio, so therefore things can't move in by diffusion. It would need to have complex transport systems. So for example, plants have xylem and phloem, which allow them to move water and ions around the plant and the products of photosynthesis. Humans have our breathing system and our circulatory system in terms of being able to transport oxygen and digested food around to all cells within the body. Okay, so that surface area to volume ratio plays a large part in, I suppose, how complicated or how complex organisms' transport systems need to be. So these down the bottom are very small organisms, don't need very complicated transport systems, whereas larger organisms like ourselves and other large mammals do need more complex transport systems. Okay, then they move on and talk about features of exchange surfaces. So in other words, how some organisms will increase their surface area. Okay, and the example of a flatworm, which is like a squashed worm, as it suggests, it has a large surface area to volume ratio. Okay, it doesn't have that complicated a transport system. It does have a gut system, as you can see there, but because it's flattened and it's got this branched gut system that runs within its body, then it's easier for things to be transported around the body. Okay, so that's increasing the surface area with a more flattened shape to make it easier for substances to pass around its body, and it doesn't have a specialized respiratory exchange surface in the way we do. A lot of things can move in through diffusion, or gases can diffuse in and out because it's so flattened and has that large surface area. Okay. Also, things which have a very thin surface, so a short distance for things to diffuse. So, for example, in the alveoli, the cells, the alveoli are only 1 cell thick, and then that's very close to the 1 cell thick blood capillary, which can transport oxygen and carbon dioxide in and out, etc. Also, you have concentration gradients. So again, if you take the lungs, you have a large or a high concentration of oxygen in the air moving into the alveoli or into the lungs, a lower concentration in the blood. So there's a difference, there's a concentration gradient. Okay, and the larger that concentration gradient, then the faster diffusion will occur. Okay, some examples of exchange surfaces here you can see. So this will be the section through the root. You have the root hairs here, which increase the surface area. Okay, as you can see, so that's increasing the surface area there. So more of that cell is in contact with the soil. So oxygen, carbon dioxide can move in certain directions. Water and ions can pass in. Certain mineral ions can also be taken in by active transport, etc., or facilitated diffusion. Also, red blood cells are adapted by having that biconcave shape, and that gives them that large surface area. Also talks about them being tightly packed with hemoglobin. There's no nucleus, so that there's more hemoglobin within a red blood cell, and that's the bit that carries the oxygen. Thin membranes here around the outside of that cell membrane, short distance for things to move in and out, which allows it to pick up oxygen in the lungs and then transport it to the tissues where it's required. Okay, the next bit they then talk about is the mass flow and of transport and how things move by mass flow. To be honest, that's really looking and learning this table. So with the xylem, it transports water, and water moves as what we call a transpirational stream, and we'll look at that in terms of the plant transport topic. But water molecules are very good at sticking together, and there's little attractive forces because they're polar that keeps those molecules together, but they move as a mass. They move en masse, so they move together. Phloem tissue transport the products of photosynthesis. They require some active transport to be involved in that, so ATP is involved, so they have companion cells with lots of mitochondria, which provide the ATP for that translocation of sugars from the leaf to, for example, the roots, or to the growing regions, the shoots and the tips, as we call it, the roots and the shoots, as we call it. Circulation in mammals, again, is by mass flow, so blood being transported around the body by the heart, and it provides the pressure for that, so blood to pass all around the body, again, en masse, and it transports the different substances that the body needs or gets rid of, so oxygen, glucose, amino acids, carbon dioxide, urea, that the body will get rid of. And also in terms of ventilation, in terms of breathing, air moving in to the lungs in terms of inhalation, and then air moving out of the lungs in terms of exhalation, and the muscles and pressure changes involved in that we'll take a look at later on. Okay. Then they go on and talk a little bit about Fick's law. Okay, so Fick's law is the relationship between some of the factors that we've talked about. So the rate of diffusion is proportional to a large surface area. Well, the larger the surface area, the higher the rate of diffusion. The concentration gradient, so again, in terms of a large concentration gradient, will increase the rate of diffusion. And then the thickness of the membrane. Okay, so if you have a thicker membrane, that makes the number on the bottom larger, which means the rate of diffusion will decrease. Okay, so really, if you want a high rate of diffusion, you want a high surface area, you want a high difference in concentration or concentration gradient, and you want a low thickness of the membrane or diffusion distance. Okay, and then that will increase the rate of diffusion, but it may be that you have to talk about different factors involved with the rate of diffusion. So large surface area, large concentration gradient, small diffusion pathway or diffusion distance or thickness of membrane. Okay, and examples of where these exchange surfaces occur and how they're affected by Fick's law. I think if you talk of the leaf, it's got a high surface area. which will help with diffusion. The membranes are thin, which again helps with diffusion. And you've got generally, most of the time, you've got that difference in concentration of oxygen and carbon dioxide, things moving in and out. Root hair cells, again, the same. They increase their surface area to try and increase diffusion. They have thin membranes, again, to try and increase that diffusion. The concentration gradient depends on, I suppose, amount of rainfall, if we're talking about water, or different ions within the plant. In terms of carbon nitrogen cycle, it could be related to there as well. Capillaries, very large surface area, thin walls, so short distance for things to move in and out. And again, I suppose that concentration gradient in terms of digested substances being absorbed into the blood and then passing around the capillaries and into the tissues. Alveoli, to do with oxygen, carbon dioxide movement, thin membranes, that curved surfaces we'll look at in terms of large surface area. Red blood cells we've already looked at in terms of them increasing the surface area and having thin membranes. If we then think about the gas exchange in plants, okay, so you have two processes going on within plants in terms of respiration going on 24 hours a day, and then photosynthesis going on when there is enough light. Okay, so generally during the daytime. Okay, so here you can see this graph refers to compensation points that we would have talked about at GCSE, but you can see here that this below the zero line here, below the dotted line, is where carbon dioxide is given out. So that's generally respiration, so carbon dioxide being produced in respiration. So these two areas here, which are labeled Y, is when the rate of respiration is higher than the rate of than the rate of photosynthesis. Sorry. Okay. Above the zero line, above that dotted line, is when carbon dioxide is taken in, and that's generally during or when photosynthesis occurs. It's required for photosynthesis. So this big area here, X, is when the rate of photosynthesis is higher than the rate of respiration. And if we take a look during the day, you have sunrise around 6, 7 o'clock here. So that light intensity is increasing. You'll have more photosynthesis, and that goes on until sunset at 6, 7 o'clock at night, when the light intensity decreases and you have more respiration going on. Okay, where it crosses this dotted line, so these 2 points here labeled the compensation points, that's when the rate of respiration is the same or equal to the rate of photosynthesis. So that would be the light intensity there and there, where respiration and photosynthesis have the same rate. Okay, then they go on and talk about adaptations of the leaf with gas exchange. So as we talked about up above, the leaf being very thin, it having a large surface area, it's got air spaces in the spongy mesophyll, and also it's got stomata, which can open and close. And the guard cells, as we talked about in tissues and organs, guard cells are involved with the opening and closing of the stomata. And generally, you don't need to know an awful lot of the detail, but it's when water moves in and out of the guard cells. So when water moves in, the vacuole fills up with water, and that causes the stomata to open. When the water moves out of the guard cells, then the cells become more flaccid. And these will be turgid over here, more flaccid here, so it causes the stomata to close. Okay, and that can happen. Stomata can close during the day if it's a very, very hot day and the plant is losing a lot of water through transpiration. It may cause the water to move out of the vacuole, causing these stomata to close. But generally during the day, stomata are open, which allows that exchange of gases, carbon dioxide moving in, oxygen moving in the opposite direction. Okay, and that gas exchange surface, as we talked about again with tissues and organs, that gas exchange surface is generally in the lower layer of the plant. So we're talking here about stomata letting gases in and out. You've got the air spaces within the spongy mesophyll layer, which provide the space, so the room for those gases to move in and out, and then they can move to different cells. Maybe that the carbon dioxide moves into the spongy mesophyll cells, or mainly the palisade cells or palisade layer, for photosynthesis to occur. Carbon dioxide is required for that. Oxygen will be produced from photosynthesis, and then it makes its way out through the plant again, thin, concentration gradients here, causing gases to move in and out, etc. Okay, and we can see that also really with this little animation. So you've got the mass flow here of water moving up through from the soil into the roots, up through the stem, and then into the leaves. Okay, and you'll see there it may be a really hot day that it causes the stomata to close, in which case you get a buildup of water inside the leaf, or you do get water moving into the leaf, into the palisade cells with the carbon dioxide for photosynthesis to occur. And here you can see it as well, where you have the mass flow of water in red there coming up from the roots through the xylem in the stem and into the leaf. You get then osmosis of water from a high water potential to a lower water potential, moving into cells. So it maybe moves up here into the cells of the palisade layer to allow photosynthesis to occur, or maybe moves down, and then you get some transpiration of water, evaporation of water from those spongy mesophyll cells, and then it diffuses out through the stomata. And that loss of water. But that's just really showing you that mass flow, those water molecules sticking together and passing up into the leaf. Okay, then they go on and talk about gas exchange in mammals. Okay, so really here we're looking at the respiratory system and the breathing system. And for that, you can see on the left here just the alveoli. So one alveolus. So they're single layer of cells, one cell thick, so short distance. It's curved, with this sort of bunch of grapes, as I call it, or rounded shape, which increase the surface area. It's got a concentration gradient, so a higher concentration of oxygen moving in here, lower concentration of oxygen in the blood, so it's picked up by the red blood cells. And also you've got a layer of moisture in the cells inside of that layer of surfactant, which stops these alveoli from collapsing, but also that moisture layer, which makes diffusion easier, or the gas is easier to diffuse in. Okay, carbon dioxide you can see moving in the opposite direction, so your concentration gradient is the other way around. So it's moving from the blood, high concentration carbon dioxide, lower concentration of carbon dioxide in the alveolus. So it's moving in the opposite direction, and then we breathe that out in exhalation. So inhaled air here coming into the alveoli, that moist surface allowing gases to diffuse much easier. Your blood supply here is very close by, so it's a short distance, also because the walls being thin, short distance for things to move. Concentration gradient, as we talked about, high surface area, so that, according to Fick's law, will increase the rate of diffusion. Okay, and you have those surfactant secreting cells inside the alveolus that stops it collapsing in on itself. Okay, again, they talk about the respiratory system. So you can see here just the different parts. There's your alveolus, your sort of bunch of grapes with a good blood supply beside it. That will be down at the end of these bronchioles, as you can see there. But air will move in through your nose and your mouth, into your larynx, through your larynx, and down into your trachea. The trachea has these rings of cartilage which prevent the trachea from collapsing. It then splits into the bronchi, or the bronchus, one going into each lung, the right lung and the left lung here. The bronchus splits into bronchioles, which we can see here. Then you have at the end of these bronchioles, as I've said, you'll have the alveoli. Okay, you also have the diaphragm here, which we talk about in terms of breathing, is just that dome-shaped sheet of muscle, which contracts and relaxes. And you can see the rib cage here with its intercostal muscles, again involved with contracting, relaxing, moving the rib cage for breathing to occur. Okay, breathing is the last real part of this that they talk about in terms of inspiration and expiration. So when we breathe in, our intercostal muscles contract, and that causes the ribs to move up and out. Our diaphragm also contracts, and because it's that sheet of curved muscle, it moves down. That increases the volume inside the chest, and that decreases the pressure. So they work opposites to each other, if you like. When you get an increase in volume, you get a decrease in pressure. And when that pressure decreases below atmospheric pressure on the outside, that forces air to move into your lungs, and your lungs will inflate. Okay, lots of people get mixed up and think the lungs inflate and that causes the ribs and diaphragm to move. It's actually the other way around. It's the movement of the ribs, that up and out contraction and moving down of the diaphragm, that then increases the volume, as I say, decreases the pressure, causes air to move in. Expiration is just the sort of recoil of that, or the opposite of that, in that you get the intercostal muscles between the ribs will relax, and that should say relax up there and not contract, and that moves the ribs down and back in again. The diaphragm relaxes, which causes it to move up to its normal position, which is this curved shape. That will decrease the volume inside the chest, which in turn increases the pressure. If that pressure increases above atmospheric pressure on the outside, then that forces air out of the lungs and causes the lungs to deflate. Okay. They also talk at the end of this about the effects of smoking on the lungs. So in terms of tobacco smoke, you've got tar, which is carcinogenic and causes cancer, which can lead to production of tumours within the lungs, and then the function of the lungs obviously is affected because of that. And there's a close correlation between the risk of lung cancer or contracting lung cancer and the number of and years of cigarettes that are smoked. Emphysema is another disease caused by smoking, which can lead to a sort of buildup of air within the lungs, and the walls of the alveoli start to break down and not work as efficiently. You get trapped air inside the lungs, makes it harder for people to breathe, so you get a shortness of breath, not being able to do as much exercise, etc. And the final one is bronchitis, and that's an inflammation of the bronchial tubes, so the tubes here in the bronchus, and that leads to a narrowing of those tubes, which then leads to reduced airflow in and out of the lungs, which again affects exercise, affects the ability to breathe efficiently. And also tar will paralyze the cilia, which help to remove the mucus and microbes within the lungs as well. So people with bronchitis tend to suffer from breathlessness, a bad cough, and lots of infections. Hopefully that has helped with the principles of exchange and transport for AS biology.